trying to get you folks to understand this is how the smoke and mirrors works. I just simply want to find out what happened to the American dream as someone who is living the American nightmare. You got to know the facts, and if we came together, we could overcome the corruption that's murdering us all.
I'm just trying to make the world aware of the truth, and I've got it.
My time, and I woke up to a flurry of calls this morning from friends of mine who are actually very active in pushing out some of these videos that I'm recording to different social media sites, particularly TikTok, which I don't really engage that often. And when I do, I find myself losing an hour of time just like, wow, what was that? And then the next and the next and the next. And, 2 weeks ago, people were like, listen, man, you need to start getting your message out in a way that you haven't already done it. And let's experiment with things. And some of my friends started making things happen on TikTok. And the next thing I know, we've had 17,000 views on several videos that were just churned out yesterday. And a lot of comments of people are saying, who is this guy? Where is he coming from? And then, of course, people engaging into some of my rhetoric that I've put out there, and many people misinterpreting, or some people being on point, and really the litany of all of the different sorts of reactions that come from this sort of thing when people don't have a lot of context and they're overwhelmed with information all day, every day. And therein lies the craziness of this world that we live in. It's Valentine's Day. I hope that everybody has someone they love in their lives that they can spend time with. And I hope you have a terrific day. I'm going to try to tone down the anger. And I guess I'll do it in context to, or out of appreciation for love, because love should make the world go round. But unfortunately, it turns out to be greed and a whole lot of polluted sort of human behavior that tends to, I'd say, checkmate love every single time, except for those of you who never give up and never give up to the best part of humanity. So to you, I wish you a terrific day. For me, I guess, it seems this morning as I'm, just about to go to the gym, and, I find myself more familiar with this look than I might be otherwise. So I'm just going to try to stay consistent, and we'll see if this message hits those that are actually now paying attention. It's kind of a quiet morning. I think there's a collective American hangover after yesterday's terrific Super Bowl. Congratulations to the Rams. I thought watching Aaron Donald finish it off last night after the tremendous second half performance of Cooper Kupp, not to mention, of course, when we saw OBJ's incredible performance in the first half. I mean, it went back and forth, and what an exciting Super Bowl. Just the perfect sort of ending to probably one of the best playoff runs any of us who've seen who love football. But I think a lot of what's trending this morning and what I saw on Twitter particularly was yesterday's halftime performance by, of course, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg and Mary Blige and Eminem and 50 Cent, and I know I'm missing something, Kendrick Lamar. And God, what a performance! It definitely gave me so much energy. I felt like I could run through a brick wall, to be honest with you. But a lot of folks are talking about Eminem kneeling. And, I guess in solidarity with Colin Kaepernick, even though the NFL had said or warned him not to actually do that. And I thought, okay, well, here's a national moment. And it's nice to see Eminem in solidarity with Black Lives Matter and everything that constitutes, particularly the last several years, within the further framing of what's happening and what will continue to happen between those who support Donald Trump and those who are supposedly on the blue side of things. As if those are the only two choices. I guess if there is something that I hope that many of you new viewers, to me, kind of scratching your head about who this guy is. Why is he shouting at the screen? Why is he complaining, or why is he bitching about, something that I don't seem to understand? I'm a television producer. I'm an investigative journalist, and I've been around this country numerous times. It's counted about 12, 13 times over literally the last 10 years, putting together a sequence of documentaries, and one particular, a documentary series called The Con. And if you want to know who I am, I highly encourage you to just simply plug in this URL and start studying and doing the research yourself. It's called www.thecon.tv. Now, why does that matter, and who am I, and all of these other things? Well, we put together the most prolific documentary, I think the most important documentary, and maybe the most important information and revelation of, quite frankly, the last 70 years. And that's the revelation in the details of how our system is corrupt. I posed a question to you all, I think it was Friday, when I asked, how many of you, by a show of hands, I was being somewhat rhetorical and having fun with it, but I mean, I can imagine that this might actually sort itself out in the general marketplace. But I asked, how many people out there think the system is rigged? And of course, it seems like most of us are like, yeah, of course the system is rigged. But none of us, very few percentage, tiny percentage, almost inverse percentage of what our population is, understands the details of who did what, when, and how, and who covered up what to create the world we actually live in. So today, Valentine's Day 2022, National Hangover, nothing really at the moment particularly earth-shattering, even though Russia is amassing troops at the border of Ukraine to potentially invade Ukraine for the second time in, I think, 6 years. And what's that all about? Well, it's about Vladimir Putin, having leverage over natural gas pipelines and monopolization of his only resource that he really has any leverage in for Western Europe, because the Russian economy has pretty much, I think, been devastated by cronyism and what appears to be insane criminality of the Russian government, where a lot of money is, let's call it what it is, stolen. I mean, it's extracted from the Russian republics and all of their influence and their geopolitical leverage and so forth, that then goes to the hands of what they call oligarchs, people that are close to Putin, and a lot of it winds up throughout the world, particularly in the United States in real estate, which ties to Donald Trump. And there's a lot of folks out there that are like, oh, Russiagate, that Russiagate's not real, regardless of the Steele dossier and all of that stuff was bullshit. The nature of the relationship between Putin and Deutsche Bank is very real. I think Putin and Deutsche Bank paid gazillions of dollars to get out of all sorts of fraudulent behavior that both were involved with several years ago. And of course, Trump has been involved with Deutsche Bank for years. That's who his primary lender was, because nobody on Wall Street wanted to lend to him. And Deutsche Bank is a German bank that obviously has a big presence on Wall Street because it's one of the world's largest banks. And so they had loaned money throughout the years to Donald Trump's exploits in his real estate development, of course, which gave us, his television show on NBC, The Apprentice, and so forth. And it was all smoke and mirrors, basically, as far as I can see, to hide laundering money between the Russians and other entities throughout Europe, and particularly the Middle East, like UAE and Saudi Arabia and that sort of thing. I think Trump had once said that his best customers are Saudis. You can't make this guy up. Trump every day is just insane to me. But people are like, okay, so who is this guy and why is he complaining and what is he yelling about? Look, guys, the system of the United States is supposed to be a couple of things that are incredibly foundational to everything that we're supposed to be. So first and foremost, starting back in the time of the revolution that led to the Constitution, we have what's called separation of powers. The idea is that the patriots that were able to create a revolution against King George III in England, particularly the Redcoats, who were boots on the ground at that time, rebelled and wanted to get rid of monarchies because they were libertarians. They were people that wanted to live independently. Sure, there were white settlers that had slave labor, and there was a lot of things that were certainly a little bit horrific to modern day America. But the nature of the founding fathers was to create separation of powers between the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the administrative branch, so that we had no one entity that could control everything at everybody else's demise. That's what's monarchies, that's oligarchies, that's dictatorships, under any form of ism, whether it's communism with Stalin, or fascism with Hitler. All of those sorts of systems economically are pretty much just the coercion between the power. Those who might be, in more recent times, let's call it the industrial power or technical power, alongside the administrative power. And the United States is designed to be able to thwart that sort of dictatorship. That's the whole idea of freedom, liberty, and justice for all, based on the rule of law and the integrity of law, that nobody is above the law. So in 2008, we had what was known as the Great Financial Crisis. It was literally a global crisis that stemmed from the housing collapse in the United States that ultimately wiped out the way the international economy works, the global economy works. And at the stem of it, the root of it, was that we had a liquidity crisis. Liquidity means cash in the system or buffers within the financial systems and the banks and so forth to be able to lend and continue the process of economy of scale. So if there's developments and there's building and companies have to be able to make payroll and all of those people consume based on the amount of money that they're making. If you have a complete and utter and immediate seizure to the liquidity system, then that just basically means currency and money dries up. And that led to this absolute disaster, which was a run. And it was predicated on a whole bunch of different pieces of the puzzle that we lay out completely in the con. And the reason why all of that is important is because nobody in this country understands what we've actually become. We're not a country of life, liberty, and justice for all. We're not a country where the law, targets everybody equally. I shouldn't say targets, but treats everybody equally based on nobody is above the law. In fact, it's just the opposite. There's a lot of people out there, particularly on left-wing, supposedly left-wing media. If you consider Rachel Maddow left-wing, you don't understand what Rachel Maddow is or who she is. There is sort of a machine behind somebody like Rachel Maddow, particularly at MSNBC, where she is, I would interpret, the communications director for the Wall Street Democratic meritocracy, which means, it's kind of a collusion between those who are wealthy on the East Coast that go to Ivy League schools, that come out as professionals, whether it's legal, accountants, or in the financial industry, and they've created a conversion of sorts. And because of their influence and quite frankly, their ambition and their smarts and their unbelievable ability to understand the system, ultimately means that they write the rules, they get to operate within those rules as they see fit, and what they've created over the course of 4 decades is a neoliberalism, which led to financialization, which is just the opposite of the FDR sort of government of by and for the people. And we've had, over the course of decades, a massive dystopia propaganda racket that has. You can get a little bit difficult and in the weeds on this particular conversation, but what happens is a lot of this rhetoric led to this notion that A, government is bad, and B, regulation is bad. But if you break it down to its most simplest and elegant form, regulation is just simply cops on the beat. So there is an incredible disconnect between those on the right, particularly those who are always screaming bloody murder for law and order, but ultimately it's like law and order for whom, for what purpose? And in this particular case, law and order as it relates to financial markets, as it relates to regulations, whether it's in the pharmaceutical industry that gave us the opioid crisis, if it's in the fossil fuel industry that gives us an energy crisis or a pollution crisis, if you live next to a refinery and there are no rules and regulations and you start to turn on your water and you can actually light it on fire, those are examples, or that it potentially gives you cancer or kills you. Those are examples of why you need regulation. You need to be able to curtail, industries' excesses and profiteering in a way that they don't destroy the people and ultimately consumers. I mean, that's the idea. That's the concept. Everything has to be in balance, and I think we all know that from common sense. Most of us try to teach our children to go to school, to do good grades, to be honest and not to lie, and to be a part of the system and be responsible. It's just the opposite of how it works when you get rid of regulation. And so what I learned after the great financial crisis, and I had lost my home to foreclosure, and it didn't make any sense to me. I've got a significant story that is on display in a couple of different places. I would encourage you to look it up if you are asking questions. But ultimately, the lesson was that it just caused me to ask questions, because what I was experiencing at the time didn't make any sense. Because I thought that, for example, we have professionals in our system that would prevent what I was actually experiencing. And what was I experiencing? I was going through a foreclosure process, working with what we called servicers at the time, that were doing a song and dance and basically shell game, and I knew it. How did I know it? Well, I'm a business guy, and I know that you can write down loans and you can negotiate situations based on what the reality is. And what I was learning that was conflicting and contradictory to what I was seeing every night on nightly television at that time, and I know millions of us experienced the same thing, where when President Obama came into the presidency, we had an initiative called the Homeowner Affordable Modification Program that was supposed to give those that were in these toxic loans an opportunity to modify their loans to write down to the value of what those homes are worth, which would reduce the amount of your mortgage, and and then you could stabilize that through a 30-year fixed modification. And the servicers and then ultimately what we call the foreclosure mills didn't negotiate. And so one thing led to another, and I was in the midst of this racket, and I knew it was all a deceptive dance. I knew I was getting played, and I was like, well, how am I getting played? So I started to pull the threads, and one thing led to another, and it led to this multi-year, multi-state journey that's beyond comprehension, where my crew and I actually did the work that the FBI, the DOJ, the SEC, AGs around the country, all of the different acronyms of government agencies that are tasked to prevent this sort of thing from happening, unfortunately didn't do or couldn't do. And they couldn't and didn't do this as a result of corruption. Corrupt influences, a complete train wreck of how things were working out, and pretty much everybody running for their own life rafts. So imagine we're all on the Titanic, right? And the way I kind of think about it is those above the line, those the most influence, the most power, the most prestige, the most money, already had a reservation on the only lifeboats that would actually be able to ferry people away from the sinking collapse of the Titanic. And the rest of us were there to fend ourselves on, life rafts that couldn't accommodate the amount of people that wanted to get on. And also the ones that did exist, the life rafts would, be filled with holes, and everybody would have to, try to murder each other to survive in a very bad situation. I think that's exactly what took place during the 2008 Great Financial Crisis. And so some of the younger generation out there, particularly those that are responding and tuning into some of my videos on TikTok, are like, well, who is this guy and where is he coming from and why is he raging and what is he talking about? Well, many of you probably think of the 2008 Great Financial Crisis as ancient history. I mean, probably many of you were children. But if you're coming into adulthood, I'm sure many of you actually had family members that had lost their homes in this madness. Maybe you experienced a divorce in your family. Maybe you had somebody commit suicide. Those were pretty frequent. Those disastrous human collateral damage of this whole thing. But it wasn't a natural disaster. It was all engineered by a system. It was all engineered by a system that runs the real power of this country, which is the financial apparatus of the United States, which incorporates and pretty much is Wall Street. And Wall Street is made up of banks. It's made up of financial institutions like hedge funds and private equity firms and a whole potpourri of different people that angle on ways to make money on money. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. If you've ever heard of The Big Short, that's one sort of example that they convey how the whole thing went down. But in the end, it's really not that difficult. What you need to understand is that if something gets really complex, and you want something like a house or a car or a student loan or, borrowing money, credit, all of those things, what you don't understand, or many of you don't understand, is behind the house, there's a whole apparatus of this machinery that's really quite huge, and it determines the outcome of pretty much everything. And that power has literally hijacked the United States. The financial power has taken over all of the decision-making prowess within the judiciary, within obviously Congress, the administrative, and then the judicial, I think I just mentioned, or the executive branch. I mean, the notion of corruption is it's pay to play, quid pro quo. Somebody gets paid to do something deceptively so that somebody else can get away with a crime. That's corruption. It's pretty simple. We've seen it in a million movies 1,000 times throughout our lives, and it'll continue every day until the end of time, and it's actually been a part of humanity, I think, probably from the beginning of time. But the United States actually remedied that over the course of its history through a whole lot of fits and starts, and revolutions and counter-revolution and civil war and all of these different things that are a part of our evolution, both good and bad, with the notion of in order to form a more perfect union. And so we were getting closer and closer and closer to a system that actually made sense if you think that we have a country of, by, and for the people. But the reality is we have a country of, by, and for the financial system. And so, look, I don't want to be too rhetorical, and I don't want to go too far into this because we all have things to do with our day. But I'm just going to say, I'm going to try to translate this into something I think we can all understand, that I think will kind of break down the boundaries of your mind to get to what I'm trying to get you to. Okay, imagine if the Pledge of Allegiance were actually the reality of what I'm saying. It would go something like this: I pledge allegiance to the flag of the corrupt and perverse states of America, and to the financial system for which they serve, one nation in the dark by way of deception, with liberty and justice for those that stole it. That's the reality. And so what you have to understand is that finance literally targeted a lot of vulnerable people with what we call asymmetric information. It's a trick. The greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. They can create smoke and mirrors in a way that you think you're buying into something that you're actually not. You can get set up. You can get betrayed. What you don't understand is the back end, okay? And that back end controls everything. And so as a result of that, there is a huge disparity of wealth. We have enormous wealth in the hands of the very few that have created monopolistic powers that literally control our political process. So you don't live in a democracy. I like to call it corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate. And whether you think you're on the blue side with Obama, and Obama came into power and actually allowed all of this stuff to take place, which gave us MAGA and Trump. And Trump is just kind of a derelict version, I'd say a byproduct of this corruption. And it's a race to the bottom. And it's simply where we are. And I don't know, I guess I'll keep churning these things out. But for those of you who are like, who am I? Why are you listening to me? Why do you want to listen to me? Well, it's because if you want to live in a system where we actually are liberty and justice for all, where everybody does have an opportunity to get a piece of the American dream, where we have upward mobility and dynamism predicated on a system that makes sense, it has to have integrity. You can't build an airplane designed to fail. You can't have a ship that's supposed to float when you've sabotaged it to sink because someone else is going to make insurance on it and then start it again. And here's the ultimate trick about this whole thing, guys, and this is what really pisses me off beyond comprehension. In this country, everything is supposed to function by some very basic foundations, right? Supply and demand. Okay, supply and demand is supposed to, create a free market where great things happen. The most ambitious and the most enterprising and, intelligent people that can get great products that the people want, that move society forward to the market, that they've gotten investors, and then, they're able to create an efficient and a productive, product that then, it rewards them, is really the concept of what we're supposed to be. But that's not what happens anymore. It does, but fewer and far between of what it used to, and it's because of the system that's riddled with rotting corruption. And we have a central bank, the Federal Reserve, that provides free money to the players that create the system, that loan against the system, that create liquidity in the system, but then they can go out and they can create products that they actually bundle to put into securities that actually are then purchased by the Federal Reserve. And a lot of that stuff could be sawdust based on the same kind of thing that we put in the con, which is what everybody needs to get on the same page about. What's going on now is no different than what took place in 2009. It's like Groundhog Day. It's step and repeat. And it's because this system has been so extremely inventive and successful at making sure you don't understand what it is that I'm telling you. Why am I telling you this? I guess I just come from a generation where the ideas of liberty and justice for all matter. And so that's where I'm coming from. Check out www.thecon.tv. Have a great day, everybody. Hopefully we'll tap in more and more. I just made a promise to myself that I was going to find the answers.